Okay, so I think, is this the last of the short stuff? It is. So this is a series that Charlie came up with so that we could cover whole books of the Bible, just in a short session. And tonight we're looking at 3 John, which it should be fairly easy to find that in the Bible because it's not the last book and it's not the second to last book, but it's the third to last book, and it is very short, and it'd be really good if you had it in front of you, because I'm going to get you to look at it in a minute or two and I'll ask a question, and you'll need to have the text in front of you to be able to answer the question. So get yourself a copy of the Bible, either on your phone or whatever, or there's old school actual paper Bibles around the place. What do you think? No good? Use a phone, right? Okay, fair dues. And I'm going to start off by reading it, and I think I put an image up there of a person writing a letter, because essentially this is just a letter that the Apostle John is writing, probably near the end of his life, to a younger man called Gaius, whom he's had a friendship with. Okay, and he's writing to encourage him. And so, in the ancient world, they sign their name at the beginning of the letter, not the end. Does that make sense? So we tend to sign our name at the end of a letter, but actually on emails, we would normally have our name right at the top, and we're reverting back to how they did it in the ancient world, right? So it starts, the elder. That is what John is referring himself, and literally the old man. Okay, so he's saying, I'm an old man, and I'm writing to you. The old man, the elder, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. It gave me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth, telling how you continue to walk in it. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honours God. It was for the sake of the name that they went out, receiving no help from the pagans. We ought therefore to show hospitality to such people so that we may work together for the truth. So this second section, he is talking about something that was very common in the early church, where people would be ministering, they would be people who would be teaching about Jesus, and they would travel around the place, going to different churches and telling them stories about Jesus, having messages from the apostles. And when they turned up at a place, there were no hotels to speak of, so if people wouldn't put them up, they'd have to sleep rough. And so there was a well-established behaviour in the early church quite early on, that when messengers like this came from the apostles, it was expected that people would put them up in their homes. And so John is congratulating Gaius for doing that, for offering help to people who are coming to minister. But then he alludes to something that's going wrong. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. So when I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, spreading malicious nonsense about us. Not satisfied with that, he even refused to welcome other believers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. So this chap Diotrephes is causing trouble in the church that Gaius is in. He is refusing to allow John, or indeed any other Christians who are travelling around to minister. He's refusing to let them in the church. And John says the reason he's doing this, it's got back to him, is Diotrephes doesn't want any rivals in the church. He wants to be the leader. Okay? And then he says, dear friend, don't imitate what is evil, but do what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. Demetrius, not Diotrephes, but Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone, and even by the truth itself. We also speak well of him, and you know that our testimony is true. So 2 examples. Diotrephes, don't be like him. Demetrius, be like him. And then he says this, I have so much to write to you, but I do not want to do so with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace to you, The friends here send their greetings. Greet the friends there by name. All right. So next slide, please. And the backdrop then to what's going on here is the kind of way in which these early Christians all related to each other. Okay, so they're all separated, they're in churches that the various apostles have planted. It's not like today where you can get in a car and drive 20 miles, you wouldn't even think about it. Going any distance at all is a bit of a challenge. It's actually quite dangerous because there's lots of robbers and all sorts out in the wilderness where the roads are. And so travel is dangerous, but the Christian church is well known by this time for people travelling around, visiting different churches, strengthening each other. And so hospitality is a big deal. Sharing is a big deal, because if there's no hospitality, you can't have any of this travelling ministry, because people would have nowhere to stay. And so the backdrop to all of this is essentially the way these Christians related to one another. And this introduced us to a very important word, which I'm sure you've heard me speak about before if you've knocked around to the church for any length of time, and that's the Greek word koinonia, which is usually translated in our Bibles fellowship. But it's a very strong word. When we think of fellowship, if I said, come for a time of fellowship, you would be thinking that I mean basically for a bit of social interaction, maybe some food. But when we're talking New Testament koinonia, it literally means sort of very strong emphasis upon sharing life together. Now, if you imagine if you're brought up in a community in the ancient world, it's not anything like today. You maybe only see 200 or 300 faces in your entire lifetime. Your circle of reference is quite small. And then if you choose to be a Christian, it gets much smaller still, because most of the people in your community, unless you live in a big city, most of the people in your little village or your little community are not Christians. And so you've got really quite a small gang of people that you are close to. And you share your life with them. That's what the early church did. Very sacrificially. They opened their homes and they opened their lives to each other. Koinonia can be used in two different senses. It can be a noun, that is to say, a group of Christian believers together are a koinonia, in the same way as we would say a church, you might refer to a church as a fellowship. But so we here tonight are a koinonia in Christian terms. We're a fellowship, we're a group of Christians together, that's a koinonia. But it's equally a descriptive word. It describes the nature of the way in which Christians relate to each other. So it would involve intimate spiritual communion, participative sharing in a religious commitment and a spiritual community. The koinonia of the disciples with each other and with their Lord. So it talks about a closeness that you don't find elsewhere. All right. So with all that in mind, and thinking about how this early church functioned, just a question for you. You have to look at the text. You have to look at the story, at the passage for this. I think John refers to quite a lot of different kinds of relationships in this very short letter. So I just want you to just note the different kind of relationships that John alludes to, or that he actually specifies. And then, what qualities does John praise and encourage, or perhaps what qualities does he not encourage, or does he criticise? I reckon you can probably do that in 2 or 3 minutes in your groups. So maybe in your tiny koinonias, in your rows, you could have a little chat and sort of notice the different kinds of relationships. There's all sorts actually that are hidden behind this passage. Have a look at it and see what you can find. Well, let me just introduce this by saying I reckon there's at least 4 or 5 different types of relationship hiding in this passage. And I think there's quite a lot of different things that are either criticised or encouraged or praised here. So hopefully you found some of those. We're just getting another microphone, so Charlie's asking me to keep talking while the other microphone comes up. I'm normally quite good at talking, but now I have to. I'm starting to find it hard to think of what to talk about. There we go. Charlie's got the microphone. So, let's start off. What sort of different relationships do you notice here, or the different ways in which people are relating to each other?
Friendship.
Yes, friendship. So are you thinking particularly of the relationship between John and his friend Gaius? Yes, although it's an interesting friendship, isn't it? Because they're clearly not the same age, not the same age group. He refers to Gaius as his child. He says, it brings me great joy to hear that my children are getting on well in the faith. So he's both a friend, but this is an intergenerational friendship. Interesting. Okay, next.
Actually, it's just stressing that not only is he a father figure, he's also a mentor.
He's a mentor. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly right. Anything else? Any other types of relationships that you spotted here?
Children. He calls them children.
Yes, so he's talking here about younger people that he has influenced through his leadership. Yeah. Anything else later on?
Is this how you do your sermons? Just get everyone to do the work?
Well, why not? Yeah.
There's clearly a church relationship there. We talk about people within the church.
So I can't hear you.
Relationship within the church?
Well, yeah, you've got brothers and sisters. So these are people. But he comments that Gaius is being faithful in serving some brothers and sisters that have come. He says, but they're strangers to you. These are not people. So he's opened his home to people he doesn't know, who have been sent by perhaps John or others to minister to this Christian group. So these are people he doesn't know that he's opened his home to. Anybody else that you can see here?
A community.
Yes, right at the end, it says, the friends here, so presumably he's writing from another church, the friends here send their greetings to you. Please greet the friends there by my name. So he means, my personal greetings. So there's a relationship between two churches. All right, well, there's others actually as well. There's the bad relationship that Diotrephes has with the church, because Diotrephes appears to be in some form of leadership, and he's using that as the opportunity to build his own little empire, and he's not allowing anybody else in. And so that's a church leadership relationship. Meanwhile, Demetrius is held up as a good example of Christian behaviour. All right, and what is praised here? Did you notice anything that John is commending or encouraging?
Yeah, he's encouraging hospitality.
Absolutely. So particularly encouraging hospitality towards, because really, actually, the early church could have barely functioned if people weren't hospitable, because there would have been nowhere for the apostles to stay when they went and visited from place to place. Anything else?
What would that hospitality have looked like, James?
Well, opening your home and providing food, and perhaps sending people on their way with some food when they went off to another town. There's certainly something that is commended in verse 3 and verse 4.
Faithfulness to the truth.
Yes.
Continuing to walk in it.
Yeah. Very good, thank you.
Progressing spiritually in verse 2.
Yeah. So John is telling Gaius that he is very encouraged to hear about the fact that Gaius is staying true as a Christian. And it brings great joy to John to hear that that's the case. Anything that we're told here that people shouldn't be doing? Verse 10. answer it for you. Diotrephes, it appears, is a church. He's got himself into some position of leadership in the church, and he is using it, as I said earlier, to build his own kingdom, and he is discrediting anyone else in leadership because he doesn't want the church looking to them for leadership. He wants them looking to him. And so it says that he is spreading malicious nonsense. He won't show hospitality to others who are visiting the church. He won't let anyone in. And if anybody else does it, he's abusing his power by putting those folk out of the church. All right. So I just wanted to focus for a moment or two then on relationships, and then leave you with a bit of a challenge to reflect on. So, what do we learn from this letter about relationships? First of all, there's an image there. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is a very ancient image that's been depicted of the believers, the Christian believers together, maybe sitting around having a meal together. And just want to make very clear, if it's not obvious to you already, that at the heart of Christian faith is close relationships. You can't be a Christian on your own. And if you are walking obediently to God, that will start to be seen in the quality of the relationships you develop with other people. That's inevitable. Next slide, please. So here we learn a few things about the kind of relationships that were functioning well in the early church and that John approved of. So first of all, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. I just want to make one rather obvious point. If we say relationships, most people immediately assume that we're talking about romantic relationships. There's no whiff of romantic relationships here at all. All that's being, I'm not saying there weren't any romantic relationships in the church, of course there were. But here we have a whole book of the Bible, if you like, talking very focused on relationships. Nothing to do with romantic relationships, it's to do with friendships of various kind. And I'll make a comment about that at the end, just in a moment or two. But first of all, he says, my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Now that might just be a euphemism, the commentators aren't sure, for just saying, I truly love you. But more likely, most people think it's, you're my companion in the gospel. You're my friend in Christian truth. So that made me think, I wonder, who would you identify as your companions in Christian truth? They're very important people. Secondly, it's very telling that what you have here is an intergenerational friendship, because I don't think we do that very much, which is something that we've got here, isn't it? One of the... I'm all for proper safeguarding, right? So hear me say that clearly. But one of the dangers of safeguarding is it makes adults terrified of speaking to children because they're concerned how they'll be perceived. I think it's really important that adults speak to children. Acknowledge them, make sure that children know that they are loved and welcomed. You obviously need to do it appropriately and carefully, but in a public setting, to talk to children and acknowledge their presence is just to be like Jesus. Forming relationships, friendships across generations is vitally important in the church. So that's one of the things we should be trying to do in this service. You know, don't just talk to your own children if you've got some here. Make sure you're talking to the other children that are here. As the old proverb goes, it takes a village to raise a child. So we're here to support one another, but it's not just with children. Gaius is presumably, say, a middle-aged man, and John is quite elderly here. And so John is reaping the fruit of the people that he has invested in, the younger people he's invested in, intergenerational relationships. Thirdly, John is not hesitant to express his prayerful concern for the well-being of Gaius. Many of us, very rarely, if at all, have any spiritual conversations of any kind. And I want to encourage you that it's okay to have spiritual conversations with people, Start with Christians, it's easier, and then work your way up to having spiritual conversations with non-Christians. Ask people, how are you? And express, I've been praying for you. Do pray for them. And say, I've been praying for you. How are you doing? I hope you're physically well. That's what John says. But even more than that, I hope you're spiritually well. I hope you're walking with God. Because he says, then I really do want you to be healthy and well, but much more importantly, I want you to walk in the truth with Jesus. And that should be our heart for others, particularly for young people. I want you to be well, of course I do. I want you to be physically well, and I'll pray for that. But even more important than that, if it's a choice between physical and spiritual health, I'm praying spiritual health for you. Because I have no greater joy than to hear that my children, those I have led to Jesus, are continuing to walk with him. The relationships that we enjoy within the church should include practical generosity, hospitality. Now, hospitality is going to function differently in our culture. If it's possible for you to open your home, please do it. It's critical. Bless other people by just inviting them in. Let them be a part of who you are. That's koinonia, if you can do that. Some people, for various reasons, that's not possible. So make sure you're sharing buying someone a coffee, or finding ways that your life can interconnect with others, not just because you happen to stand near them at church, but actually you're building close relationships with them and showing, wherever possible, practical care, practical generosity. It means a lot. When I was studying at Bible college, sometimes people, knowing that I'd given up work, I didn't have a lot of money, were very generous to me, gave me money. And the money was one thing, that was great, it provided for me. But much more importantly was the way in which that came to me as an expression of love. It was touching and encouraging. However, these relationships are disciplined. They are challenging relationships. When something is wrong, then something is challenged. Church relationships don't always mean that you're always just praising everything all the time relentlessly. If there's something wrong, there's a challenge. And finally, it's concerned that all our relationships contribute to the building of healthy community, and we see an expression of that right at the end. The friends here send their greetings, greet the friends there by name. Friendship is very important. Not everyone will get married, some will, some won't. Increasingly in our culture, people are, for a variety of reasons, not getting married, and increasing numbers of us are living without a marriage partner at home for, as I say, a variety of reasons. Friendship is very important, but even though not all of us will be married, all of us need friends. All of us need friends. Absolutely central to life. From the playground to the nursing home, we need friends. And we need to be good at having friendship. And if you go into a bookshop, or particularly even a Christian bookshop, and you look for books on romance, you will find gazillions of them. You look for books on friendship, you won't find very many. It's interesting, that, isn't it? And yet friendship is far more foundational. And in fact, romantic relationships, when they do occur, are usually best based on friendship. Friendship is critical. Phil Knox has written a book called The Best of Friends. Next slide, please. Anyone want to tell me what the link with Phil Knox is for this church? Someone will know. Sorry?
Marilyn Webb's son.
It's Marilyn Webb's son-in-law. Son-in-law, yes. So Marilyn Webb, who was one of the pastors here a few years back, some of you will remember her. Her son-in-law is Phil Knox. He works for the Evangelical Alliance, and he's written this book on friendship. I read last night the first chapter, and it is a brilliant book. Very encouraging for anyone. Easy to read, very moving, strongly recommend to you. I'm going to make it the book of the month as soon as I can get in touch with Phil and get him to order us a load of copies. But you could get ahead of the game by ordering yourself a copy. Phil Knox, The Best of Friends. Friendship is critical. It's critical to the church. There's no authentic church where there isn't friendship starting to develop within the church. And those friendships can be intergenerational. You know, when we think friends, probably most of us think of 6 people in New York who are all roughly the same age, right? But that's not, I mean, that's one model of friendship. But it's great, wouldn't it be great if in the church we're seeing evidence of people from different age groups, different backgrounds, being close friends? That would be a sign of the presence of God's Spirit. So, I'm going to finish by leaving you with a question. Who are you influencing for Jesus? John sat down to write a letter to his friend Gaius. He had established a relationship of influence with Gaius. He was mentoring him, if you like. And he used that as an opportunity to exert some influence for Jesus. We know he prayed for Gaius, and then he's able to say, Gaius, I've been praying for you. I hope all's going well with you physically, but even more so, I hope all is going well for you spiritually. He says, you know, if you just think about this for a moment, he's an old man, John, at this point. He'd be forgiven for sort of retiring from the scene and thinking it's time for everyone to look after me now. Instead of which, he is still caring for this guy. I was at an event just recently at which I was speaking. I was quite exhausted at the end. And there was an old man there who'd made an effort to come across London on public transport to be at this event that I was speaking at. He was 92 years old. And he came and he spoke to me and he said, I can't do ministry anymore. He said, but I can encourage you guys. He said, so it was a bit of an effort for me to get here, 92. Bit of an effort for me to get here, but I've come. I was profoundly moved. I asked him to pray for me. It was precious. Who are you influencing for Jesus?